Isn't that cool? That is called Kaddish, and it is by Maurice Ravel. It's from this awesome collection of From Jewish Life that I've been delving into with a student of mine. We've been going down the rabbit hole of Jewish music and trying to find some interesting things to play. And hand in hand with that, have you ever come across a music history textbook that actually delves into the music of antiquity, like for more than a page, maybe like 2 or 3 pages? Behold the General History of Music by Charles Burney, or Burney. This was written in 1776. This edition is by Dover. It was published in 1935, I think. I would recommend this version versus the one from 1776 because you won't be able to read it. That's where all the F's are S's, and it will probably be very expensive. So there's 4 volumes. The first volume is completely devoted to the music of the ancients. It is so awesome. It's so awesome. The Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Romans. You're welcome. I'll link the free version that you can find on IMSLP, which is an archive. But if you can pick up a book, see if you can pick up a book, because you will not regret it. It's so cool. I wanted to read you, since we're talking about antiquity today, I'm surrounded by books that I just have to share with you. So this might be a long video. On Patreon and in the studio this last month, we were delving into antiquity. Our guest artist was from Beijing, and he came to talk to us about the philosophy of music from antiquity, and it was just magical. I just wanted to sit down and tell you some exciting and fabulous things that I thought were interesting from this last month. So why don't we start with this lovely old poem from the 11th dynasty in Egypt. So that's 2100 BC. So it's called The Song of the Harpist. The harp. It's so fabulous how musicians and artists, think of all the art that's in the temples in Egypt. And the fact that this little poem from a harpist, probably the king's harpist or the pharaoh's harpist, survives. So anyway, the Song of the Harpist. Be of good cheer. Forgetfulness is advantageous to you. Follow your heart's desire all your life. Anoint your head with myrrh. Clothe yourself in fine linen. Do things while you are here on earth. Do not grieve until the day of lamentation overtakes you. Enjoy life and do not grow weary of it. No one takes his possessions out of this life, and no one who has departed returns. How cool is that? So on that note, let's fast forward a little bit. Actually, we may not really need to fast forward that much if we're talking about the music of the Hebrews. Let's take a look at this. This is Charles Burney's A General History of Music, Volume 1. There's 4 volumes, if I forgot to mention that. There's 4 volumes. This first volume is all about the music of the ancients. And I just want to take a moment to read you this wonderful letter to the Queen of England, because the Queen of England commissioned him to write this. And so it talks all about how music is there for us in our time of need. The study of music, and also just music in general, is there for us. It also talks about how music uplifts our soul and is a virtuous pursuit. It's something that is good for you to actually learn, the study of music. And the Queen of England herself, along with actually the pharaohs of Egypt, we're going to talk about Moses in a minute in the Hebrew section, they studied music as part of being a complete person, a highly educated person. You would have had to also know a little bit of music too. You might not have been a professional musician, because that might have been considered to be a, what's the word? There's a word that describes the, it would have been looked down upon to be a professional musician. But having a little bit of a background in music would have been a very good thing. Would have been considered a educated person. So, To the Queen. This is by Charles Burney. Just to open volume 1, he says, "Madam, the condescension with which your Majesty has been pleased to permit your name to stand before the following history may justly reconcile the author to his favorite study, and convince him that whatever may be said by the professors of severer wisdom, the hours which he has bestowed upon music have been neither dishonorably nor unprofitably spent. The science of musical sounds, though it may have been depreciated as appealing only to the ear, and affording nothing more than a momentary and fugitive delight, may be with justice considered as the art that unites corporeal with intellectual pleasure, by a species of enjoyment which gratifies sense without weakening reason, and which therefore the great may cultivate without debasement, and the good enjoy without deprivation." Isn't that so sweet? I just love that. I'm going to just keep going. It's a little bit longer. "Those who have most diligently contemplated the state of man have found it beset with vexations, which can neither be repelled by splendor nor eluded by obscurity. To the necessity of combating these intrusions of discontent, the ministers of pleasure were indebted for that kind reception which they have perhaps too indiscriminately obtained. Pleasure and innocence ought never to be separated, yet we seldom find them otherwise than at variance, except when music brings them together. To those who know that music is among your Majesty's recreations, it is not necessary to display its purity or assert its dignity. May it long amuse your leisure, not as a relief from evil, but as an augmentation of good, not as a diversion from care, but as a variety of felicity. Such, madam, is my sincerest wish, in which I can, however, boast no peculiarity of reverence or zeal, for the virtues of your Majesty are universally confessed, and however the inhabitants of the British Empire may differ in their opinions upon other questions, they all behold your excellencies with the same eye, and celebrate them with the same voice, and to that name, which one nation is echoing together, nothing can be added by the respectful admiration and humble gratitude of, Madam, your Majesty's most obedient and devoted servant, Charles Burney." So, how sweet. I just love that he talks about how, music can be just kind of depreciated to just something that's only appealing to the ear, which, is just momentary joy. But actually, it's a species of enjoyment, he says, which gratifies sense without weakening reason, and therefore the great may cultivate without debasement, and the good enjoy without deprivation. And I also love that he says that, humanity is beset with vexations, that you can't really escape from them if you have splendor, or if you escape to the country, you're still going to have problems. But that music is there to kind of minister to us and be there for us. And anyway, I love that he says that music is among your Majesty's recreations. Like, how wonderful that music is just a recreation to just... There's a scene in Amadeus, in the movie about Mozart, where Salieri sits down to Emperor Joseph at the clavichord or the clavier or whatever it's called, and they pour a little glass of wine or something, and they put it on the clavier, and then the emperor begins to have his music lesson, and it's just so precious. It's so precious. I feel like that's how music lessons should be. So you just, you have the same recreations as a queen or a king or an emperor, and it's really special. So, with that, let's actually delve into the music of the Hebrews, since I was playing some Hebrew music earlier. So the first chapter is actually about Egyptian music, which is really cool. And then we get into Hebrew music, because the Egyptians and the Hebrews, they go back. And the Hebrews are such an ancient race, so it talks a lot about the beginning of just kind of trying to trace the beginning almost of that history. But I just want to read you this little paragraph here. It says, Saint Stephen tells us that Moses, having been educated by the Pharaoh's daughter, as her own son, was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and Clemens Alexandrinus particularizes his acquirements by affirming that he was instructed in his mature age by the Egyptians in all the liberal sciences, as arithmetic, geometry, rhythm, harmony, but above all, medicine and music. And it's really cool. It talks about the kinds of musical instruments that they might have had back then. It talks about the Psalms, things that I can't pronounce that I think have more to do with Hebrew, that might be in Hebrew. That's why I can't pronounce them. It's a long chapter. It's quite a long chapter, and then it gets into the history of Greek music. So check this out. I also have to confess that this just arrived the other day, and I just wanted to sit down and I haven't actually read this entire book. So if it does say, because it's from 1776, if it does say some other things that might be considered extremely inappropriate today, it's just probably going to be in here. There's probably some inappropriate things that are said in here, but just take into account that it was written 300 years ago, or what year are we in? We're in 2024, so a long time ago. You guys, in our virtual studio circle for May, because we were talking about the philosophy of antiquity, we were talking about why we study music, and I was reading little bits and pieces of what I just read you, actually. It inspired me to pick up this fabulous book that I had loved reading. This is by Grandfather Cicero, who lived at the end of really not the end of the Roman Empire, but it was when, Rome was actually turning into more of an empire ruled by an emperor, Julius Caesar, that time period. And there's a lovely little chapter, by the way, to deal with the stress of that, because you can imagine, just imagine that your country is in upheaval and all sorts of crazy things are happening. His respite from that craziness was to write. And also, he threw himself completely into trying to do everything that he possibly could to try to keep things together for his country. But anyway, there's a little chapter in here called On Old Age, which is so sweet. On Old Age. So from Grandfather Cicero. He probably wrote this when he was in his 60s. So at the end of the second chapter on old age, he says, so old age, you see, is far from being sluggish and feeble. It is really very lively and perpetually active, and still busy with the pursuits of earlier years. Some people never stop learning, however old they are. You can see Solon, for example, boasting in his poems that while he grows old, he continues to learn something new every day. That is what I have been doing too. In my later years, I have learnt to read Greek. I have fastened upon this study with the greed of a man trying to satisfy a long-endured thirst, and that, incidentally, is how I know the Greek passages which you have heard me quoting. Socrates learnt to play that favorite instrument of the ancients, the lyre, and when I hear of the progress he made, I wish I could do the same. But at any rate, I have worked hard at literature. So actually, this is the voice of Cato that's speaking, and he kind of wrote this little chapter on old age through the eyes of, he pretended that he was kind of sitting there with some of his role models from the past. And so that was in the voice of Cato there, I think, who was talking about that. But anyway, if you're in your older years, are you learning something new every day? Are you trying to learn Greek? Or are you trying to learn a language? Are you trying to learn music? Socrates learned the lyre when he was old, and anyway, really sweet. I love Cicero. I'm absolutely obsessed with Cicero. It's also inspired me to read Livy's Histories of Rome. I loved the early histories of Rome. The first 5 books of the history of Rome. Oh my gosh, it's so good. In fact, I'm going to just read you something that I feel that you might need to hear. Okay. So this is from great-grandfather Livy. Although Livy lived at the same time as Cicero, so we'll call him grandfather Livy. This is in his little preface to the first 5 books on the foundation of Rome. And the foundations of Rome are like 800 BC, and then it kind of ends in, was it 390? 390 when the Gauls invade BC. So I invite the reader's attention to the much more serious consideration of the kind of lives our ancestors lived, of who were the men, and what the means, both in politics and war, by which Rome's power was first acquired and subsequently expanded. I would have him then trace the process of our moral decline, to watch first the sinking of the foundations of morality, as the old teaching was allowed to lapse, then the rapidly increasing disintegration, then the final collapse of the whole edifice, and the dark dawning of our modern day, when we can neither endure our vices nor face the remedies needed to cure them. The study of history is the best medicine for a sick mind, for in history you have a record of the infinite variety of human experience plainly set out for all to see. And in that record you can find for yourself and your country both examples and warnings. Fine things to take as models, base things, rotten through and through, to avoid. I hope my passion for Rome's past has not impaired my judgment, for I do honestly believe that no country has ever been greater or purer than ours, or richer in good citizens and noble deeds. None has been free for so many generations from the vices of avarice and luxury, greed and luxury. Nowhere have thrift and plain living been so long held in such esteem. Indeed, poverty with us went hand in hand with contentment. Of late years, wealth has made us greedy, and self-indulgence has brought us, through every form of sensual excess, to be, if I may so put it, in love with death, both individual and collective. But bitter comments of this sort are not likely to find favor even when they have to be made. Let us have no more of them, at least at the beginning of our great story. On the contrary, I should prefer to borrow from the poets and begin with good omens and with prayers to all the host of heaven to grant a successful issue to the work of which lies before me. So if you feel like your mind is sick, music and also the study of history. And Livy lived at the time of Cicero, so they were both living at the time of Julius Caesar, like 60, 40 something-ish BC. Anyway, that's been fascinating. Read this alongside Livy. This is by Robert Greene, and it's called The 48 Laws of Power. This was so fascinating, because like these books, they are talking about powerful people and how they behaved and some of the tactics that they used. And reading this alongside this was like the perfect accompaniment, because I wouldn't have even really been aware of that. I wouldn't have been like noticing the power moves at all. Super interesting. So, especially as a naive person, it's like really it's really interesting to read this. I think that's why, Livy was required reading for kings and queens back in the Middle Ages. It's just because, or the ancients would have been required reading if you were going to be a ruler. It's because you didn't want to be a naive ruler. You needed to know as much as you possibly could and be exposed to as much as you possibly could so that you could rule effectively. So, really fascinating. Alongside that, these were interesting, these books. These are all written by Anthony Everitt. Really love Anthony Everitt. Some of these I listened to on Audible, and some of them I read, and I just enjoyed them so much that if I read them, or if I listened to them on Audible, I just bought them so that I could actually read them. Because the thing is there's often like a passage that I need to put a little sticky note by, or like need to mark something or underline something, and so I had to just have the book to be able to do that. So The Rise of Rome, that was fascinating. Alexander the Great was really fascinating, although I felt like he didn't really like Alexander the Great. There was a great course that I listened to that was fabulous, which if I remember I'll link below. That was really interesting about Alexander the Great. There's one on Cicero. That was the first one that I ever listened to on Audible, because I was reading Cicero's works and political speeches and all that kind of thing. And so I was like, well, it'd be interesting to read a recent biography about him, and I loved that. So if there's one that you should read, I think it would be Anthony Everitt's Cicero, and also Anthony Everitt's Augustus. Those I think were my two favorite ones. And lastly, these are amazing. If you've been curious about the Iliad and the Odyssey, but you didn't want to read Homer's version of it, these are so beautiful. Like, this book was illustrated by Alan Lee, and Alan Lee was one of the artists on The Lord of the Rings, and the writer, Rosemary Sutcliffe, her writing is so compelling. It's just beautifully written. I just absolutely loved this book. I couldn't put it down. It made me cry. I was sitting there reading it. I was like, I'll just read like a couple pages of it. And then 2 hours later, I'm at the end and in tears. And it's really, so I had to buy the Iliad version of that too. So if you have a child, these would be amazing stories to read them. And actually, if you're a movie producer or you're like in the movie business at all, like, make a movie about the Odyssey and the Iliad. That would be so fascinating. I'm just so sick of all of the repeated superhero things, like, let's do something with the real superheroes. Anyway, I think those are the majority of my books, like not music books. This is in the process of being read. This is really fascinating. But as far as music books, I found this in a library, the Oxford Book of English Madrigals, and they're really lovely. I love the words to this one. This one's so funny. I read this to my husband because I always sing him a little song about being the best husband and everything, and so this is what I just turned to in the book when I first found this book. It says, "Mother, I will have a husband, and I will have him out of hand. Mother, I will sure have one, in spite of her that will have none. John a Dun should have had me long ere this. John a Dun should have had me long ere this. He said I had good lips to kiss, to kiss, to kiss, to kiss, to kiss, to kiss. Mother, I will sure have one, in spite of her that will have none. For I have heard 'tis trim, for I have heard 'tis trim, when folks do love. By good Sir John, I swear now I will prove. By good Sir John, I swear, now I will prove. For mother, I will sure have one, in spite of her that will have none. To the town, therefore, will I gad, to get me a husband, good or bad, Mother, I will have a husband, and I will have him out of hand. Mother, I will sure have one in spite of her that will, in spite of her that will have none. And it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a 5-part little song. I bet these like would have been, like little party songs. You'd like sit around and see if you could sing a funny little song. So anyway, this was number 24, Mother, I Will Have a Husband, and English madrigals. And you see how they would have sat around the table after dinner. You got your little drink, and you're going to sit and try and sing a song. Anyway, so sweet. With Jewish music, let me just show you these. These have been in my little, whatever this is, my little chest of drawers, which is filled with music. A little book of klezmer tunes. Really interesting. Really sweet little Jewish folk music. And then we've got this other book on klezmer fiddle, which is really interesting. Like Fiddler on the Roof. Like if you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, see how there's a lovely picture in there. Really sweet. And it comes with a CD as well. So anyway. And then with medieval music, this last month I picked up these. I think these are awesome. You all probably know that this is my favorite book ever. I think this is like my favorite book ever. Cantigas Renaissance Festival Favorites. I call this the Blessed Cantigas book because it's just magical. It's just so magical. And if I remember, I'll link it below for you. But this month I also found these. These were from England. They're called the Living History Tune Book. Volume 1 is all medieval dance tunes from the 12th and 14th centuries. Volume 2 is also medieval, 12th to 15th centuries. Book 3 is Stuart and Commonwealth. So these are English dance tunes from the 17th century. And actually, let's see, the 17th century, that would have been a little bit before this. So 1700s, 17th century, this would be 1600s, and then this would be 1700s. So this last one is book 2, the Renaissance, so dance tunes and songs from the 16th century. And I just think these are so cool. So they're compiled by Jane Foster, and they're just called Living History Tune Books. And there's 4 of them in this collection that I've really enjoyed. They've just been fun to sight read through, and I just really enjoyed them. Rummaging through my little chest of drawers, I remember that I had this. This is for recorder, but it's written in treble clef, and so as a violinist you can read it, or even as a violist you could read it. But little medieval and Renaissance music for the recorder by Mel Bay. Mel Bay also publishes the Cantigas Renaissance Festival Favorites. Mel Bay is awesome. I really love so many of their books. I think that's it. I have one last little song to play for you. It's so fun. It was the rock and roll from 1390, 1390s. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for sticking around with me today. I hope that you feel inspired to go grab this book. This is just so cool. Volume 1 is all on the music of Antiquity. Go check out some of these books from medieval time period. Klezmer music, the English madrigals. Who wants to have a party where, you just eat a lot of food and you drink lots of wine and then you try and sing a funny little song? You try and read music and you try to sing a different line of music with your friends. What an edifying party, And then we've got from Jewish Life. I don't know if I showed you this, but I also came across this. This is pretty cool. Hebrew melody. And Yasha Heifetz. I guess this is his arrangement of that. So you guys, have a lovely month, and I'll see you next time. And we'll see what else, what new exciting things I have to share with you next time.